Welcome to the FNO InsureTech podcast, a place where movers and shakers from all points within the insurance ecosystem gather and discuss all things InsureTech. We talk about how technology and innovation are affecting and driving change in the industry. Here are your hosts, Lee Boyd and Rob Beller.
Hey, podcast world, welcome to another Rob-only episode of FNO InsureTech, your podcast about InsureTech that no matter what, no matter what's going on, no matter the ups, no matter the downs, we're here covering the InsureTech universe. And I'm here today with our two producers, Alicia Moss and Al Muya, because Lee Boyd isn't with us. That's right. He had something better to do today. So the smart one isn't here and you're stuck with me. But that's the bad news. The good news is that we have a great episode awaiting you. In just a minute, we have on the two co-founders of Talage. These are two guys who've known each other for like ever. Matt Donovan and Adam Kiefer are with us. Adam is the CEO and Matt is the COO of Talage. And Talage is an API management solution for carriers. They're a platform out there that connects agents to carriers in specific product lines. And these are two guys who bootstrapped it, came up, did it on their own, had a vision. Mostly, for the most part, insurance guys who had a vision about what could be. And they, gosh darn it, if they haven't made it happen. And you're going to hear a lot about it today. Super interesting company, not far from me here in California, in Reno, Nevada. And not exactly an InsureTech hub, but doesn't really matter where you live today, does it? I don't think so. So without further ado, let's get into our episode with Adam Kiefer and Matt Donovan, co-founders of Talage. Hey, everybody, we are here with our special guests and without Lee Boyd today. But you know what I always say, who needs Lee Boyd? We don't. And to prove it, we have two of our latest victims with us today. We have Matt Donovan and Adam Kiefer, the C guys, the co-founders of Talage, coming to us from where, guys? Where are you?
Well, the company's headquartered in Reno, Nevada, but like most companies, we're a little bit distributed at this point. So I'm in Reno, and Matt's coming up up in Truckee, California, up by Lake Tahoe.
Oh, very nice. I like Truckee. Yeah, for those of you who don't know Truckee, tell us about Truckee real quickly.
It's a mountain town, certainly a vacation spot for a lot of people, kind of really all over. It's probably most famous for hosting the Olympics back in the 60s. And we're a short drive to Lake Tahoe.
And not far from Sacramento, my hometown.
Absolutely. Just probably an hour and a half.
And so because now we know of that connection, I'll be counting on that dinner real soon. It gives us something to look forward to. I'll choose the restaurant, by the way. Thanks a ton for being with us. We really appreciate it. And we are here today primarily, of course, to talk about Talage, the company that you guys founded several years ago. I mean, you're like the person who like came out of nowhere and was a big hit, but had been working on it for 10 years to get there. Adam, let's start with you. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about Talage and what you guys do and what you're about.
Yeah, I mean, I think, probably the best way to kind of tell that story is a little bit tell my story. And so, so Matt and I, our stories are pretty much intertwined at this point, but we grew up together. We went to school together. Matt's mom was actually my fifth grade teacher, which is how we officially met was through Matt's mom. But after college, I got into the insurance industry. Started working for a regional agency, got purchased by Wells Fargo Insurance. So worked for a really big agency and kind of saw some of the pros and cons with working for somebody like Wells. And then had the opportunity to move to the carrier side. And, this was 2014, 15. And, some early kind of InsureTech before people were using that word was starting to come out, and the carriers were putting in predictive analytics and, doing some automated underwriting on the back end. But kind of my role in the company in terms of managing kind of the field sales reps, noticed pretty quickly that there wasn't any way to really drag that technology down through the distribution channel. And so independent agents in the field and the policyholders weren't getting the same benefits that the carriers were. And ultimately the carriers weren't getting all the benefits they could because their distribution channel didn't have access to that tech. And so that's really, at a very high, overly simplified, kind of level, the mission of Talage was make it easier to sell small commercial insurance policies, take the tech from the carriers, push it down through the channel. I think we were a little different early on than some of the other guys that came out, like a Next or a Lemonade, who obviously have different business models and different verticals. But a lot of their marketing was around, make it easier to buy policies. And we kind of focused on make it easier to sell, right? Like we thought it was, the buying experience wasn't great, but we didn't think it was that wasn't the issue, right? The root issue was that the selling experience was bad, which is what made the buying experience bad. And so that's really where we try to focus and kind of carve a niche out for ourselves.
So you were there really for the agents.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's who you were thinking. That's who you were thinking of.
Yeah. And so I've been a licensed agent for 20 years. When Matt and I started working on this, we decided it was in everybody's best interest for him to get licensed. So Matt, what have you been licensed now for probably 5-6 years, right? Something like that.
Yeah, probably like 5 or so. It was a great way to kind of drink from the fire hose and dive into the industry.
So tell us how it works. I mean, what's the product? What does an agent get out of doing business with you? Or do they do business with you? Explain that relationship.
Yeah, no, the agents absolutely do business with us. And what's kind of cool about our model is that we don't mess with the model, right? Agents have been working with carriers, they've been working with policyholders, they're getting paid their contingencies, they're getting paid their commissions, all that kind of like the Talage system really keeps all that intact. And so when you look at, what we've done from a product standpoint, kind of the core of the whole thing is our aggregated API. And what that is, I'm sure you've covered APIs multiple times on the podcast by now, but right, we're actually hitting their underwriting platforms, their issuance platforms, their service platforms in certain circumstances, really making it easier for, carriers to kind of open up, become open source platforms in the way they service their business. And so what we've done that's pretty unique is then taken all those APIs from different carriers, and we've standardized them, right? The industry is, probably infamous for having, many, many standards. Feels like they don't quite know what that word means, but, we've got the SIC codes, the NAICS codes, the question sets, the workers' comp codes across the different states. And, even within, workers' comp, you have some carriers that use a 4-digit NCCI code, some use a 6-digit NCCI, right? Like, so you've got all these kind of varying levels of the same standard. And what we've done really is kind of put those into one Talage standard so that you can access 20 different carriers at the same time through one point until one time you can tell Talage, I'm a barbershop. We essentially translate all that on the back end. We send Travelers whatever they need, Liberty whatever they need, AmTrust whatever they need, and essentially do the translation for you. And so it really opens up APIs to kind of the common agent, right? Where they it doesn't take $500,000 or more to build a system that can talk to these things, and in a couple of days, and for a few $100 a month, an independent agency anywhere in the country can have access to these tools and make them far more efficient in terms of remarketing their book, doing book rolls, new business acquisition. And we've built a whole suite of tools around our core API to aid in that process.
And Matt, talk about what your role is here.
Yeah. So, as Adam was kind of talking about, how Talage really came from his experience. When you look at where I kind of jumped in there, my background, I've been working with and at startups for over a decade. I got into it back in 2010 after grad school. I started work with American Express and their digital strategy team, working with a few different startups. And then from there, worked at 2 different startups, joined early, helped them launch product, and was with both of them through acquisition. So when Adam came to me with, kind of some early thoughts around what he wanted to do at Talage, what I was really excited about was, one, he had a clear problem. You see so many startups in today who build cool tech and then they try and find a problem to solve. We kind of came at it from the other end. As he alluded to earlier, it's very clear, like it is hard to sell commercial insurance and there aren't digital tools to enable that. So that's where, when we started talking about it, was we kind of approach the problem from a few different ways. And one of the things that, was unique from my background, back in 2015, when we started working on it, started working on this, I was at the time with a startup that was very early in the API space. So from a strategic standpoint, we very early on kind of doubled down on this API. And so the next piece is, after we started to build that platform, was to push it out into the market. And that's where I have a lot of experience. I've helped launch a couple different startups and do different things and go to market. And so Adam and I have worked very closely on, all aspects of launching Talage, but that's where I've certainly spent a decent amount of my time.
So did you guys have a picture in your mind of what this technology was going to look like when you got started, or has that been its own journey?
It has been its own journey a little bit. I mean, we should have opened with neither Matt nor I are engineers. So, I had this big grand vision of, just this magic tool that could do everything for everybody, right? And then, Matt had some great ideas operationally and kind of go to market. We had this perfect business plan, and then we said, okay, well, now we actually need to build something that does those things, right? So we worked with some contractors early on. Now we've got a CTO on board who has got a ton of experience kind of dealing with large platforms, and he worked in fintech with kind of early technology around, kind of mobile banking apps and things like that, really dealing with large volumes of transactions. And so he's done kind of a lot of interesting things. And so he's been able to essentially take, my vision that, vision is strong, it's on napkins with crayons, essentially is how we drew the whole thing out. And he's been actually turning it into a grown up project that actually works and does what we tell people it does.
And I think the one thing that we have been consistent on from the beginning was this idea of what Adam referred to as an aggregated API. Like, what we wanted to do was to take all of the carriers' digital platforms and consolidate them down to a single endpoint to access it. Now, how we did that is what has absolutely been changing. And then on the other side, how people access that, the different distribution players, agents, tools we give them, that has absolutely been an evolution. But at its core, the idea of let's take all these carrier platforms and aggregate them down to a single endpoint, that has not wavered.
Does an agent come to you because I need a commercial policy for my restaurant that I have one, I have a single unit restaurant and I need commercial insurance of all stripes for my business? I go to an agent and then an agent says, give me a minute. And then they go on Talage and find it, essentially the workflow?
There's a little bit more than that. I mean, essentially what we do is we sell them the platform. So you're an independent agency, you come on our platform, and we call our independent agency facing platform is called Wheelhouse. And the idea of putting small business back in your wheelhouse, right? So that's the branding around that. And Wheelhouse is really designed to be white labeled and, should match and feel like the agent's own portal, right? Like it's theirs. And so kind of the main component is we have a portal. So in that scenario, a restaurant goes to an agent, the agent logs into their own Talage portal. It's their own licensing. It's their own appointments. Talage, doesn't mess with their kind of business structure in terms of the way they run on a daily basis. They can pull quotes back from the carriers using all their appointments. So they pull a quote from AmTrust or Liberty, and, AmTrust or Liberty sees that, agent XYZ just submitted this quote, right? Like we become invisible in the day to day. And so what we really do is kind of allow them to operate their business the way they always have, but do it in a way that's far more efficient, faster, and cleaner. Then we've got Wheelhouse has built-in tools that they can use as all part of the same package, where it's essentially a digital storefront. So we can match the experience of a Next or a Lemonade, like I talked about, where consumers are looking for more of that digital shopping experience, even if they aren't quite ready for the digital buying experience. I think is kind of where InsureTech is. But we can give a local agent in Reno, Nevada, who barely has a website, advanced digital tools and digital storefront, where a business owner can go in there, put it in their application, get multiple quotes, compare them, educate themselves, and then essentially the agent at the end of the day just goes, great, like, you want the Travelers one, or we recommend the AmTrust one, or whatever the choices are, and so they can replicate that experience while keeping an agent in the flow. So
are agents paying a subscription for it?
Yep. So it's just a monthly subscription fee for them to access it. So
that's awesome. They must love that.
Yeah. I mean, it's starting to take off. We're getting a lot of success on the independent agency channel. Cause again, like we become invisible, right? Like we're not, there's been others that have come out where they kind of act as a wholesaler and MGA kind of in the middle, and taking a cut of that, or they're aggregating
as a marketplace.
Totally. Right. And then, I think what agents forget maybe initially, it comes right back real quickly, is that those aggregators are then the ones who are, essentially collecting those contingency checks on the premium, right? And so we're keeping the premium stays with the agency. It's not, it's not Talage's premium, and none of that stays with the agency. So it really does keep their model intact, but just make them better at it.
Mm-hmm. So you're familiar with Bold Penguin.
I've heard of them.
They position themselves as a marketplace.
Yep.
Correct?
Yep.
But that's kind of they're in a different business than you guys are.
Yeah. And I think it's become kind of a dirty word, and I don't think it should be. It's just a very different business model, right? Where essentially Bold Penguin is doing lead gen, right? They're kind of farming around leads from different agents and passing them around different people. And I don't mean that to sound, it's not a knock by any stretch.
No, it's their strategy. That's their business.
Yep. And so ours from the jump has really been, and I think it comes from our experience as agents. And we've got a ton of our employees either, worked for carriers and worked with agencies or have been agents themselves. And so I think our perspective on, the agent, historically, everybody's predicting the death of the insurance agent for 30 years, right? Like they're constantly, being under threat of being, replaced or disintermediated or, whatever word you want to throw in there. And that's not our goal. Our goal is to enable these guys, make them better, make them stronger. We think there's a ton of value in having an agent in the transaction. The
fact of the matter is that it's our experience. I can't tell you how many times we've had episodes where the agent has come up or been central to it. And the fact of the matter is even many InsureTechs that are, InsureTech insurers, a la Hippo, for example, start with, we're going to be direct to consumer.
Yeah.
And the fact of the matter is that it's a really tough product to understand.
Yeah.
Just selling it through your website.
Yep.
And you kind of need somebody to hold your hand to get you to write to the check writing part.
Yep.
Yeah. Right. And so is that going to change? I don't think so. And you guys must see that, right?
Well, I think the easiest evidence to support what you're saying is just all those guys who came out going direct. They all have agents now. I don't know if anyone's left go direct. They learned it the hard way, but we absolutely agree with you.
And I think it may change, but I don't think it's changing in the next 10 years, right? I think people want to have that agent there. And, I think a lot of the analyst reports and all that stuff, people are, I forget the latest numbers, right? But they're impressive where it's, 70% of insurance buying starts online. But it's like, half of that ends online, right? Like people want to have that to kind of educate themselves and poke around and see what's going on, but they want to have a person there. Exactly your point. Like when it comes time to write that check or, connect that ACH payment, they want to know, they know what they're doing here, right?
Right. When you get to the screen that says, or click here to speak to an agent, that's a busy button on the website.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love to tell the story. I recently changed my insurance and went through the whole process because I tried to go through it as a consumer and got really turned on to it by doing the podcast. And what I found is that it's really hard. And I wasn't searching for commercial insurance. I was just looking for my home and auto.
Right.
And it was hard.
Yeah.
And because then you have the whole problem of comparing apples to apples, which is really hard.
Yep.
That company can save me money, but it's less of a policy.
Right.
And so there's just a ton of nuances, and I think it's a long. And I'm not saying this in support of anybody. I just think their agents are here to stay, and they're important, more important than I might have thought a few years ago.
Well, it's a unique product, right? And just in general, in terms of like it's essentially a promise, right? Like you're buying nothing initially, right? Like the only time you actually get the product,
you're sending money. You're buying a promise.
Yeah, something terrible happens. That's when it comes. And so I think, we hear all the time, and I think people have, changed a little bit, but, especially early on, it was like, we want to make insurance like buying Amazon, right? Like, and if I want to say, well, I'm going to buy cheaper toilet paper on Amazon and it shows up and I don't like it, like it's kind of no harm, no foul, right? Like it's fine. Like next time I don't save that dollar, I splurge for the good stuff, right? Whereas, an insurance product, like if it's not the good stuff, like you don't know until it's far too late, right? Like, and then there's nothing you can do about it. So
yeah, you typically find out the details of that promise when you have a claim.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And when they say, "Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Beller, that was excluded in your policy," right? Or some such thing. So let's talk about carriers for a minute.
Yeah.
And what's in Talage for the carrier?
I think there's essentially two things, right? Access to distribution. So we've got our wheelhouse network of agencies and wholesale brokers that we're working with. And so when you come onto the Talage platform as a carrier, you get immediate access to that. Our platform, I think, offers unparalleled, I would say. I would challenge anybody in terms of flexibility. When a carrier comes on the platform, they can kind of distribute any way they want. They only want to work with independent agencies. They only want to work with some. They want to work with wholesalers. They can kind of pick and choose how they can access our network of agencies. And so first and foremost, I think we're a distribution platform and allowing, carriers to distribute easier. I think the other thing you're seeing on the distribution side is, more and more people kind of understanding what APIs are and how to use them. The carriers are getting calls from, small operations going, we want access to your API. Well, it's not a nominal fee for the carriers to, to have
Correct.
engineers kind of integrated.
It's not a service.
No. And so, we're seeing a lot of carriers kind of turning to us going, hey, a big giant opportunity comes up, we got it. But we get 30 calls a week. Can you guys integrate these guys? Can they get access to you through us? And so I think not only kind of normal distribution, but also the digital distribution running through us just makes life, and from a maintenance standpoint too, right? Understanding if you change something to call those people. And then the other piece, the other big advantage to Talage is the data. The applications that are running through that platform, we sit in a relatively unique position where, I saw this when I was working for employers, I'd walk into an agency's office and go, how's the market look? How are we competitive? And they'd tell us, hit your high because, a week and a half ago, we sent in a quote that was twice as much as Liberty's. And I'm like, okay, well, that's not helpful. Whereas on the Talage platform, it's all anonymized and aggregated, of course, but they can come in and actually see how they perform against the field and how they perform against the market so they can understand, in Southern California, we are high. And maybe they want to be, right? But no one's ever given them hard data in terms of, where you actually stand in the market from a pricing standpoint, where you stand from an opportunity standpoint. You guys have passed on, a dozen landscapers in the last month, but other carriers have written those landscapers for $200,000 in premium. And again, maybe you change something, maybe you don't, but at least you have access to that data and you can see what's going on in the market. And so that's the biggest piece. It's access to distribution and it's data is what we give them.
And the other thing to keep in mind, carriers, is that the whole reason they built these APIs, right, was it increases efficiency for them as well, right? And so that's why the other piece, our distribution, is so important, because it's not just distribution, it's distribution through their API. And I think when we started on this, we first started talking about it in 2015, the idea of being APIs being critical to the future of digital distribution for commercial insurance, that was a little bit of a leap. Whereas today, I think that's kind of accepted across the board. But it is important to continue to recognize that APIs bring efficiency to the entire process, and everyone wins as the more premium that we start having flow through them.
Are you fussy about the carriers that you add to your platform? Is there a certain vetting or criteria that you want them to, or are you just happy to have big names be part of it?
I think that's been an evolution, right? When we first started out, a big name is what we needed, right? Because we had this kind of weird chicken and egg problem where we needed carriers to get agents and you needed agents to get carriers, right? And so anyone that we were, charming enough to convince to come on the platform early on, we did. Now at this point, we've got, 20 something different carriers that are on the platform, across 5 different product lines. And so now it's much more strategic in terms of, what can you bring to the agencies? What are the agents asking for? We get a lot of feedback from agents saying, hey, we want XYZ carrier. And so, kind of taking feedback from the distribution channel is obviously a benefit, because then we spin up a carrier who has instant access to distribution is obviously a win for everybody. And so much more discerning about, who comes on the platform and who doesn't at this point, and priorities of different carriers. But I would say that wasn't always the case, right? But we're getting
there. Well, you wouldn't really have a platform if you didn't have carriers.
Exactly.
Right?
No, and we absolutely wouldn't. The carriers are, arguably our most important customer, right? If we don't have any carriers, we have nothing to sell to an agent. So.
As we were first getting going, there's not many carriers that had APIs as well.
Yeah.
So that's the other thing that's evolved in terms of the industry, is that's becoming table stakes, if you will.
Sure. I'm sure that COVID probably helped them move that along, huh?
Yeah. From a mindset standpoint, I think it helped a ton, right? I think carriers realized they needed to change the way they're doing business. And, I think we definitely saw a bump in activity because of that. I think they also quickly realized that they're pretty far behind, some of them. So some of that bump has subsided a little bit as they actually got the development bill to build some of these things out. But
it's really great to have you guys. I'm just take a little side here. Years ago, the third or fourth episode we had was with Caribou Honig, who's the co-founder of ITC, right? Great guy, by the way, if you don't know him, great guy. And I have nothing but great things to say about Caribou, super smart. And he talked to us back then that it's all about APIs. Yeah. APIs are the future. APIs are what's going to happen in insurance, right? So here we are now. We're about 3 years old, our podcast. Here you guys are, right? So that's pretty exciting. I want to talk about your product lines. You said you have 5 product lines. Can you tell us what those are?
Yeah, so it's workers' comp, it's general liability, BOP, cyber, and professional liability are the 5 product lines that we have up and running. Working on a commercial auto product now that should go sometime this year. A lot of intricacies to that one, as you can imagine. But yeah, so I mean, really trying to build that kind of core, commercial suite so that we can check that box off for the agents that are on the platform.
So you probably have agents on the one side saying, add this, and carriers on the other side saying to you, sell more.
Yes. And then our engineering team in the middle going like, throwing their hands up. But yeah, we're definitely trying to balance, in terms of, new features. And I think that's something you learn as a new company or young company in a way. We get a client who calls and, like, we need this feature, we need this carrier today, right? Like, and I think you want to react to that, but I think over time you also realize that like not every request is the same, right? Like, and then if we don't, if one agent thinks one thing, that may be totally different than what every other agent thinks, right? And so, kind of balancing the product and the features and the carriers and understanding as we grow, kind of backing up and seeing what's more of a priority here and what's more of a priority here. But yeah, I mean, we're constantly getting new feature requests, new carriers trying to come on the platform, the carriers have new feature requests like, hey, can you display us this way? Can we do this? Can we do this? And so, yeah, our product team and project management team is constantly busy trying to figure out. And then you got, whatever idea me and Matt make up on a Saturday night that we bring in on Monday morning, right? Like that gets thrown in there too.
So Matt, as the go-to-market guy, this must all be a big challenge.
Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest challenge was a few years ago, as Adam was alluding to, is, what comes first, the carriers or the agents? At this point, we're in a really exciting
Great
spot.
question.
Yeah. I mean, at this point, we're in a really exciting spot that we have 20 plus carriers. We have a network that makes our platform really compelling to a lot of different players. In some ways, I think the biggest challenge from a go-to-market is continuing to stay focused and make sure we have the right product. Because like right now, we're getting calls from, tech players who are interested in bringing in insurance to their platform, independent agents, wholesalers, MGAs. We have a really compelling platform, and we just need to make sure we're working with the right partners in a lot of ways.
Do you work with MGAs?
Yeah, yes.
They're both shaking their head yes. For those who can't see what I'm seeing.
It's one of those things I think neither of us knew which was going to jump in. But yes, we do work with MGAs. Depending on the MGA, we can work with them in different ways. And in a lot of ways, you can almost think of them as another carrier partner where we can take their product and enable digital distribution for them.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So we're very interested in cyber, and because there's probably nothing that's growing like cyber is growing today.
Yep.
And that should continue probably for a long time, sadly. Talk about that a little bit. What can you share about, it's probably one of your newer product lines. Tell us some stuff about cyber.
Yeah, it's definitely one of our newer product lines. And cyber is interesting because you have a ton of interest, right? Because it's scary, right? Like people see these big, hacked, big giant companies get hacked, and they think, if Target can get hacked, what chance do I stand, right? And so I think it's a scary product, or not a scary product, a scary problem with an interesting product that goes with it. I think on the flip side, it's also a product a lot of people don't really understand in terms of what it actually covers and what it doesn't cover. And so I think, having an agent involved in that, I think is paramount when it comes to the cyber coverage. Personally, I think it's important enough to be a standalone coverage, but frankly, the way it's bought and shopped for a lot of times, it becomes this ancillary thing where it's like, we got a BOP quote and then we throw in a cyber quote on top of it. Right. And, BOP, obviously a lot of the BOP carriers are building in some cyber coverage. Right. And so it's an interesting product because there's definitely demand for it, but it's also one thing I think people don't understand a lot of things about insurance, but cyber is even worse where it's like, what are we buying and what if the credit cards are stolen, is that covered? If the computers are stolen, is that covered? Where are the different lines? If, somebody hacks into my social account, like, is that covered? The damage is there. And so understanding the nuances of a cyber policy is interesting. we see a ton of interest in it. But I think it's, to our point we've been trying to make the whole podcast, I think it's one that the agents have to stay involved in. And I think it's really important that the agents are involved in cyber because they can really kind of understand and, translate for the business owners what's covered, what's not covered, and when.
Matt, what can you add there?
I think Adam covered the majority of it. I think it's
your points. Sorry, Matt.
Yeah, it's something we're hearing a lot about, both from carriers who are looking to roll out new cyber and they're going to API enable it. And on the other side, it's something that agents are constantly bringing up because, to Adam's point, it's something that's being discussed a lot. So they have demand for it on their side. So giving them the tools to be able to distribute it and quote it effectively is going to be critical.
And just, from a revenue standpoint too, right? Because it's it's one of the few hardening markets and hardening at a pace where, obviously there's a lot of revenue for an agent's perspective to be selling more of these policies, right? The premium on those are going crazy.
Crazy.
Yeah.
I was a partner in a company. We sold our company a couple of years ago. Thank goodness from an insurance expense standpoint, because what it was costing a year was extraordinary.
Yeah.
And like you say too about cyber is that a lot of people don't know what they're buying.
Yeah.
Yes, we dealt mostly, our customers were carriers, and we work for a company now whose customers are carriers. And the carrier would say, you need to have $5 million of cyber coverage.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Okay. What's that?
Right.
What am I doing? So is comp your largest area, your largest product line?
Yeah. And simply because, frankly, it's the one we've been doing the longest. And so my background kind of coming from employers, obviously understood workers' comp, pretty well. I think I mentioned that I work for employers. Maybe I didn't. I worked for employers if I didn't mention that earlier.
You didn't.
That was the carrier that I worked for on the distribution side. But so obviously, intimately familiar with the comp product. And so when we launched the product, really the MVP was, a comp rater, right? It had, employers, I think Markel, a couple other early carriers that got on board quickly. Yeah. And so that was kind of the MVP was a comp product. And so it's really evolved from that. And so comp's been on the platform for the longest. We also have the most carriers from a comp standpoint, in terms of the integrations that we've done, just again, because we've been doing it longer. So comp is really long answer to a relatively simple question. Sorry. Comp is the biggest product, but mostly just because we've been doing it the longest. So
is there a sweet spot that you guys can see of the mix that you end up having, like how many carriers, the products that you sell? What are your ambitions? Can you talk about that?
Yeah. What's cool about our platform in general is that we actually leave that mix to the agent. And so, we've got our 20 carriers on the platform, our 5 different product lines, but then we go to an independent agent and they may go, we only want to work with 3 of those. And our platform is flexible enough. We're like, okay, pick which 3 you want, right? So the 17 exist wherever they exist. And so no 2 instances of Talage or Wheelhouse are the same because it can be customized by the agency. And so, we're constantly looking for new carriers because, there's a lot of, regional things that come into play with insurance, right? Like the agents that we work with down in the southeast part of the state or in California have different carriers they want to work with. And, sometimes they overlap, sometimes they don't. And so we're constantly looking for more integration so that it can all just be one place. And the agents and the wholesale brokers and whoever can really customize, what that mix looks like. Cause I do think, sorry, Matt, I know I'm stealing all your talking points. But I think, if you present somebody with 20 different options, it's too many, right? Like you need to give them enough. There's a fine line there of enough where they feel like they've done their diligence. They feel like they understand the market. They understand their options. But I think you can give them too many where they don't now you've confused them more, right? Like what's the difference between these 20 different workers' compensation policies? And so I think, kind of that 3 to 4 is the number that we usually see that we get the highest bind ratios, or request ratios anyway. When we give them about 3 or 4 options, like that seems to be kind of the magic number where it feels like diligence was done, feels like people need to know what they have, but it's not completely overwhelming.
And the other piece, other way to kind of look at that question in terms of our sweet spot and the growth, the exciting thing about our platform is that we've built it in a way that it's going to grow with the industry as the industry gets more and more comfortable with digital distribution, right? Today we are very focused on small commercial because that's what our carrier partners will quote through their API. But we've already seen them over the few years we've been working with them that they've expanded their appetite for their API. And we built a platform flexible enough that as they expand their appetite, it just starts flowing through our platform. right? So from that standpoint, when you talk about product lines and things like that, that's all going to expand, over time as the importance of the API expands across different product lines. So there's really no limitation from our platform from that standpoint. We're not going to stick to certain products in commercial. What we're going to do is we're going to work with the products that are API enabled, and we're going to grow with our carrier partners as they grow what they do in that space.
Do you have access to excess and surplus currently?
So we haven't done that yet. We're working actually with a couple of different wholesale partners that actually do some of that stuff. And so actually talking with them about, I think we recognize that I think there's also another group of InsureTechs out there that we've partnered with that recognize we can't do everything all the time, right? Like we just don't, there's not enough time in the day. There's not enough engineering. There's not enough resources, right? We can't do it all. And so we've worked with, I guess we've announced them, but we're working with, like Relay Platform, if you're familiar with those guys, right? Like they've got some excess and surplus things that we can look at and kind of put on our platform using some of the integrations they've done. They're looking at basically doing the same with some of our workers' comp and general liability and BOP capabilities. So it's like, we can both basically, offer each other's kind of products to each other, run them through each other's platforms, and everyone can kind of move faster. And, we can put together, essentially, a team to go against, some of the bigger incumbents in the software space. And so, we have not gone down the E&S route directly, but we are essentially kind of partnering to offer that to the agents because it definitely comes up.
So you guys have been, from what I understand, very successful in the venture market, venture-backed company. What can you share with our audience? We have a lot of InsureTech people listening. I think you guys just raised a round recently, if I'm not mistaken. That must have been interesting and a little bit different and maybe challenging based on the times. What can you share about that?
Yeah, I think, and Matt definitely has thoughts on this. I know he does. But I think from my perspective, like every time I think I start to understand the venture market, like I realize I don't know anything about it at all. Right. And so I think we've been kind of fortunate in the timing. We did just close a round. We recently announced it, but officially we closed it in January. But, I think our timing has been, someday hopefully we can look back and claim we were super smart, but we closed around in November of 2019. So we were funded kind of going into 2020, which was, like I said, completely lucky on our part that we didn't have to raise money during 2020. I can't imagine the companies that had to do that. And then this one, we closed this round in January, but most of the legwork had been done in December. And so we got out ahead of, Ukraine and inflation and all these other kind of turbulent things in the market that just create uncertainty. And so, I think our timing has been good. Like I said, someday we'll look back and claim we totally did it on purpose and knew it was going to happen. But,
timing is everything.
Yeah, for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, we've talked to others who, are trying to raise now and who long planned that this was the time.
Yep.
And it's been certainly challenging, regardless of how strong their business model is.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's different times now.
Yeah. And I mean, it's tough too, right? Especially being in the InsureTech space, because you have a lot of these fintech VCs who say they want to get into InsureTech. And look, if we're being honest, insurance is an incredibly complicated industry. And so some of these people jumping in, they may not get what you're doing. And then on the flip side, you do have some of these true InsureTech VCs, but they're coming from insurance. And historically, it's a risk averse industry, so you have some of the fintech guys who will maybe take larger leaps with you. But then on the flip side, they may not necessarily understand your industry. And then you go talk to the InsureTech guys, they get what you're doing, but they want to see different milestones. They want to see you get a little farther along. So there's a little balancing act in terms of finding your fit with the right investors, with where you are, how big your vision is, because look, if you're working with venture capital, you have a big idea. They don't make investments on something that's going to double their money. They make investments on something that's going to potentially 100x their money.
Right.
There's going to be a leap involved. To make that type of jump, you have to have really big ideas. And so finding the people who really get where you're coming from and share that idea, it's not easy.
And I'll just say, as we start to come to a close here, that I love your guys' story in that you're both not technology people per se, right? Adam, more of an insurance guy, an insurance background, and you had a vision about what technology could do for insurance, right? A lot of times we talk to people that it's kind of the other way around, right? It's, I have a technology, where can it land? And that's a little crass, but it's somewhat true. And you guys are more so insurance guys who had a vision, and I love that story. And that, I mean, when we talk about insurance and we talk about the industry and we talk about the nuances, like you're saying, that it's risk averse. Well, that's their business, right? Risk is kind of the whole thing. Yep. In fact, that's what frequently I'm on the phone with somebody about a claim and they're like, yeah, let me tell you about the risk. I mean, it's the vernacular. Yep. It's the center point of what we do. And so you guys brought a lot of knowledge into this and you're having success, as opposed to you could only kind of dream about what the technology could do, right? And just in closing, share some thoughts now that you guys are like 8 years into this, right? Long time. As you said, in the InsureTech world, there wasn't even that word really when you started.
Yeah. I remember, I think back, because we're not quite 8, but coming up, but we went, you brought up Caribou earlier. We went to the very first InsureTech Connect. We, heard about it through Twitter, or I don't even know where we saw it. There was, 1,000 people in Las Vegas. You could talk to anybody you wanted to talk to. And Matt and I showed up. We took vacation time from our other jobs. Like, I think both of our wives made fun of us for taking vacation time to go to an insurance conference. Flew down there. We shared a room because we didn't have any money. And so, it kind of how far, now you go to InsureTech Connect, right? Like, and it's this giant, massive event and
crazy,
Ludacris is there, right? The whole thing is absurd, right?
Right.
And so it's like kind of to watch, I think the success Talage has had and watching Talage grow has been a lot of fun, but also just watching an industry really be created and be part of, really the forefront of an entire industry being created has been a lot of fun. And, I think it's, whatever happens with all of this, I think it's going to be a fun period of our lives to look back on and kind of say we were there, we were there when, right? So.
And I think the really exciting thing to Adam's point, to be there at kind of the beginning of the InsureTech wave. But the exciting thing is insurance is so large, and you look at where InsureTech has penetrated, like we're still at the beginning. You talk about, I think Adam and I had our first call about Talage in the summer of 2015. So we have been working on this for nearly 7 years at this point, but I still feel like in a lot of ways, that still has a day one feeling to it. Mm-hmm. So yeah, definitely an exciting space to be in.
Yeah. When we started talking about doing this podcast in 2018, and one of our big fears was that we would run out of people to talk to, right? First of all, we never thought we could get to 5 episodes, but then we thought, well, how are we going to get to 30? Yeah. And now it's like, as they said early on, we started to hear the term ecosystem. As the ecosystem of InsureTech is built out further and further and further, and guys like you have seen that, and we've got to see it too. I think that one thing that InsureTech is discovering is that, wow, there's even more opportunity that hasn't even been touched yet.
Yep.
Right?
Good.
That's a pretty cool spot to be in, right?
Yeah. And I think the big thing that kind of what you're talking about with that idea of the ecosystem, some of those new opportunities it's going to be the existing players who, in the last few years, maybe viewed each other as competition, and they're starting to realize we're not competition. So if we start working together, and really build out that idea of an ecosystem, then the technology is going to become so much more powerful, and we have a few partnership announcements coming up this summer where, if we start working with AMSs and some of these different things, we don't want to be an AMS. We're not going to compete with AMS. But what if an AMS had our quoting capabilities, and that idea of really building a true ecosystem, that's kind of what I was alluding to with the idea of like InsureTech has come a long ways, but like there's still moments where you realize we're still at the very, early days.
Yeah. The opportunities that you can see today might not have been seeable a year ago.
Yep.
Right? Or you wake up in the middle of the night and it's like, oh gosh, you know what we could do? And anyways, well, I'm going to let you guys go so you don't wake up in the middle of the night and say, God, how much longer could that guy talk for? We really thank you for being here. And it's great. I'm serious. I'm in Sacramento and I'd love to come up to the office sometime if anyone's ever in it. And next time I'm in Reno.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. People are poking in more and more. We're doing that remote hybrid, flexible, whatever you want to call it. But would love to have you.
Well, we thank you for being here, and let's check back in a year or so and see where this rocket ship is at that time.
Sounds great.
Sounds good.
Thank you. Well, I hope you all enjoyed that as much as I did. I love learning about companies that are successfully moving forward in the market and monetizing successfully and doing a great job of providing a technology first product to the insurance world. And Talage is perfectly that example. I'm sorry that Lee wasn't here to see that. He would have really loved this, but I'm glad that you all were with us and got to enjoy Adam and Matt and hearing all about their company. So until next time, we will say what Lee always says, and that is goodbye, everybody.